When JD Vance leaned into the microphone and casually threw out his challenge IQ test, "You and me," he wasn't really trying to make a serious proposal. It was a political jab, wrapped in a smile, aimed at scoring a quick headline. In that moment, Vance wasn't just questioning Jasmine Crockett's intelligence. He was revealing something deeper, something most people might have missed if they weren't paying attention. His assumptions. Vance has built a public persona around being the thoughtful, conservative, intellectual. He prides himself on his Yale law credentials, his best-selling book, and his ability to navigate highbrow conversations while appealing to working-class voters. But when he looked across the table at Crockett, what he thought he saw was someone who didn't belong in the same intellectual league. It wasn't just about policy disagreements. It was about hierarchy. And in his mind, she was below him. That moment on live television was not the first time Vance had used academic elitism as a tool. He often framed arguments with subtle suggestions that his opponents lacked critical thinking or serious credentials. What made this moment different, though, was how openly he laid out the challenge. There was no nuance, no policy angle, just a straight-up dare. Prove you're smart, or be publicly labeled as someone who isn't. But the thing is, Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't get flustered or defensive. She didn't meet his energy with the same kind of performative aggression. Instead, she calmly placed a sealed envelope on the table. No grandstanding, no yelling, just a quiet move that changed the entire dynamic. Vance seemed momentarily thrown. He had expected either silence or a loud rebuttal, something he could spin as emotional or reactionary. But what he got was a trap he hadn't seen coming. By turning his challenge into a real-world proposition, supported with a certified Mensa IQ assessment Crockett had taken months earlier, she flipped the narrative. Suddenly, he wasn't the one setting the terms. She was. And in that shift, Vance exposed his own blind spot. Because his challenge wasn't really about intelligence. It was about who he believed had the right to claim it. In his world, credentials mattered, but only the kind that looked like his. Prestige was valuable, but only if it came from the institutions he respected. Intelligence was measurable, but only when he was the one doing the measuring. Crockett didn't just beat him at his own game. She questioned the entire premise of the game itself. In a way. JD Vance revealed more about himself in those 36 seconds than Crockett ever needed to say. He showed that for all his talk about lifting up working-class voices and challenging elitism, he still held a narrow view of who gets to be considered smart in Washington. And when someone outside that mold calmly countered him with proof, he had no response. The irony is thick. Here was Vance, the self-proclaimed intellectual outsider, falling into the same old trap, assuming that someone who didn't come from his world couldn't possibly outmatch him in it. He assumed that his opponent would be caught unprepared. He assumed that an IQ test, of all things, would be his winning card. But he didn't consider the possibility that she had already played that game, and won before he even sat down at the table. The fallout afterward wasn't loud. Vance didn't go on a media tour to defend himself. He didn't issue statements, he didn't take the test, and that silence spoke volumes. Because whether or not you believe in the merit of IQ scores, one thing was clear. The man who issued the challenge walked away from the actual contest. And Crockett didn't need to say a word more. The envelope said it all. When Jasmine Crockett reached into her bag and placed that sealed envelope on the table, the air in the room shifted. JD Vance, who had just moments earlier casually challenged her to an IQ test, seemed caught off guard. What had seemed like a bold, almost mocking move on his part, turned suddenly into a much more serious and risky moment. Crockett hadn't responded with outrage or sarcasm. She responded with preparation, and not just any kind of preparation. She had a pre-verified letter detailing her results from a certified Mensa IQ assessment. It wasn't just unexpected, it was devastatingly precise. JD Vance's facial expression betrayed something subtle. He hadn't anticipated any real pushback, let alone this level of strategic foresight. The envelope wasn't just a document. It was a quiet declaration that Crockett had anticipated someone, maybe even him, trying to corner her on intelligence or credibility. She knew the landscape she was operating in. She understood that some people wouldn't give her the benefit of the doubt, wouldn't assume she had the intellect or credentials to match them. So she had taken steps months in advance to protect herself from exactly this kind of moment. What made it more powerful was her calm demeanor. She didn't shout. She didn't have to. She tapped the envelope twice and issued a challenge of her own, one grounded in facts, not bravado. She invited Vance to take the same test, under the same conditions, and return with his results. There was no insult in her tone, no mockery in her words, just a simple offer that exposed the hollowness of his original jab. And that's where things flipped. JD Vance had tried to elevate himself by implying she was beneath him intellectually, but instead of proving her worth on his terms, Crockett revealed she had already done the work on her own terms. She didn't play into his narrative, she rewrote it. That envelope represented control, discipline, and a long game that Vance clearly wasn't playing. Asterisk from that moment forward, the balance of power in the exchange changed. Vance had opened a door, thinking he was in control of the narrative, but Crockett stepped through that door holding receipts. And the thing is, once the envelope was on the table, there was no backing out. Whether Vance responded or not, the damage was done. The room had seen it, the cameras had recorded it, and the public had a front row seat to a masterclass in restraint and strategic dominance. Asterisk, this wasn't just about an IQ test. It was about the ability to anticipate attacks and neutralize them before they land. Crockett didn't get flustered. She didn't scramble. She revealed that while Vance was setting traps in real time, she had been building a defense months ahead. That level of calculation didn't just neutralize his challenge, it made him look reactive, impulsive, and unprepared. Asterisk, and perhaps most tellingly, JD Vance didn't rise to meet the moment. After Crockett offered him the opportunity to take the same test and return with his results, he didn't answer. Not then, not the next day, not even in the days that followed when the clip was going viral. He simply faded from that part of the conversation. The man who had confidently thrown out an IQ challenge suddenly had nothing to say about IQ at all. Asterisk in political terms. Silence can be louder than rhetoric. Vance's lack of response read not just as retreat, but as recognition. He may have realized, too late, that he'd walked into a conversation he wasn't equipped to finish. And Crockett, for her part, didn't chase him down or gloat. She let the moment and the envelope speak for itself. Asterisk, when she eventually unsealed the letter on a podcast, revealing a score in the top 2%, it didn't come with theatrics. It came with data. She simply confirmed what she had suggested all along, that she had prepared for this kind of scrutiny long before Vance had decided to question her. Asterisk, the public reaction was swift and largely one-sided. People saw a sharp contrast between someone who tried to play intellectual chess live, on air, and someone who had been playing it quietly behind the scenes. Crockett didn't just answer his challenge. She proved that his assumptions about her were never rooted in fact. They were rooted in bias. And that made the envelope, and what it symbolized, all the more powerful. There's a particular kind of silence that follows a moment of unexpected defeat, not loud or dramatic, but the kind that lingers, exposing everything left unsaid. That was the silence JD Vance found himself in after Jasmine Crockett calmly laid down the sealed envelope containing her Mensa IQ results. It wasn't just a clever move, it was the kind of decision that reshaped how people saw her. In the world of politics, where perception often outruns policy, Crockett didn't just defend her intellect, she quietly redefined her public identity. Asterisk, before that encounter, many saw Crockett as a passionate lawmaker from Texas, known for her pointed questioning and sharp commentary. Critics underestimated her, often dismissing her fiery rhetoric as style over substance. JD Vance likely shared that assumption, which is why his challenge carried the tone it did, calculated and cloaked in faux collegiality. He believed he was calling her bluff. Instead, she revealed that she was holding the entire deck. Asterisk, what Crockett did in that moment wasn't about winning a debate. It was about revealing the absurdity of needing to prove yourself in a system that rarely assumes your intelligence unless it looks or sounds a certain way. She didn't respond to Vance with the kind of performative rebuttal he likely expected. She didn't try to go toe-to-toe in a loud reactive exchange. She simply showed she had already thought 5 steps ahead. Asterisk, the envelope wasn't dramatic. It was strategic. It told a story of foresight, discipline, and an understanding of how public opinion forms and spreads. She knew that in a room full of cameras, impressions last longer than facts, so she brought both. The fact that the envelope had been sealed months earlier, time-stamped and witnessed, spoke volumes. It meant she had taken the test without being prompted or goaded into it. She wasn't reacting to JD Vance. She had already anticipated someone like him would come along. Asterisk, and that foresight did something rare in politics. It shifted the narrative without shouting. After she placed the envelope on the table and issued her quiet challenge back to Vance, she didn't need to say much else. The moment went viral, and for good reason. It was the kind of turn that didn't require a victory lap. The power came from its subtlety. Asterisk, JD Vance, who had come into that exchange with confidence, seemed diminished afterward, not by insults, but by his own miscalculation. He thought he was putting her on the spot, testing her poise under pressure. Instead, he was the one left without a response. His silence in the days that followed said everything. He didn't take the test. He didn't try to match her. He didn't address it directly. And in doing so, he confirmed what many had suspected: the challenge was never sincere. It was a trap meant to embarrass, not engage. Asterisk, but Crockett's reaction didn't just turn the tables on him, it transformed her in the eyes of the public. She was no longer just the bold voice in hearings or the viral clip from a committee meeting. She became a symbol of quiet readiness, a woman who knew the room, understood the politics, and refused to be underestimated. People who had previously dismissed her as emotional or unpolished were forced to confront something far more uncomfortable. She had anticipated the moment better than her opponent had, and she had done it without theatrics. Asterisk, that kind of control is rare. It's one thing to react gracefully when challenged. It's another to already be prepared for the exact kind of attack your opponent thinks is clever. Crockett's move revealed that she had been living in a political reality JD Vance hadn't considered one, where women like her don't get the benefit of the doubt, where credentials are questioned not out of curiosity but out of suspicion, and rather than complain about that reality, she quietly built a defense against it. In doing so, she changed how people viewed her not just as a fighter, but as a strategist. She didn't need to prove she was smart. She simply revealed that she had already been tested, and the person who issued the challenge, the one who thought he was in control of the exchange, ended up being the one with no answer. JD Vance came to that conversation to expose her. Instead, he exposed himself. And Jasmine Crockett, without ever raising her voice, walked away with the win and a new kind of respect. JD Vance had entered that room with a sense of comfort, maybe even superiority, when he issued the challenge to Jasmine Crockett, suggesting an IQ test as a measure of their competence. It sounded like he believed he was setting the rules. The confidence in his voice, the casual delivery, it all signaled that he saw himself as the one in charge of the conversation. He believed he had the upper hand. But by the time Crockett calmly responded and laid that sealed envelope on the table, the dynamic had quietly shifted, and it never returned to his favor. What was most striking wasn't just that Crockett had prepared for a moment like this. It was that she had done so without needing to showboat or seek permission. Her silence in that brief pause after his challenge was powerful. When she placed the envelope down and issued her own quiet call inviting Vance to take the same supervised test and return with results, it wasn't just a rebuttal. It was a redirection. She was no longer responding to his challenge. She was establishing her own terms. And that's where Vance began to unravel, not dramatically, not with some viral blunder or defensive meltdown, but in a way that was more subtle and, perhaps, more damaging. He said nothing. No follow-up, no acceptance, no comment. The very man who proposed the test as a public spectacle vanished from that part of the conversation. It was clear he hadn't expected to be taken seriously. More importantly, he hadn't expected her to be ready. This silence said more about JD Vance than any post-show interview could have. The fact that he didn't rise to meet the challenge he initiated revealed the hollowness of the moment he tried to engineer. It exposed a larger issue's habit of wielding intellect like a weapon, as if intelligence were a stage prop rather than a lived reality. When it came time to prove his point, he backed away, and in doing so, he revealed that the entire challenge had been performative from the beginning. What Crockett demonstrated was that the smartest person in the room doesn't need to perform intelligence, they simply show it. Her strategy wasn't rooted in confrontation, but in certainty. She didn't come to that panel expecting a challenge, but she had already accounted for it. And when Vance presented the opportunity to try and corner her, she let him speak, then responded with a move that neutralized him completely. This wasn't about IQ scores. It was about something deeper: credibility, preparation, and the quiet power of not needing to prove yourself to someone who never expected you to be prepared in the first place. JD Vance relied on assumption. He assumed she wouldn't be able to match his challenge. He assumed she would either dodge or deflect. But Crockett understood something he didn't. That in a political environment built on perception, real power often comes from the ability to remain calm and calculated when someone else is trying to provoke you. After that panel, Vance never brought up IQ again, not with Crockett, not in interviews, not on social media, and that silence was louder than anything he might have said. His refusal to take the test or address the envelope became part of the story. He'd framed the test as a measure of seriousness, but when faced with the same terms, he walked away. And that exposed not only a lack of preparation, but a lack of follow-through. Crockett, on the other hand, didn't need to chase him. When she later unsealed the envelope during a quiet podcast interview, she didn't declare victory. She simply let the contents speak for themselves. Her score wasn't just a number, it was a rebuttal to every unspoken doubt people like Vance had tried to plant, and she didn't need him there to validate it. That's the part that stung the most. JD Vance had expected to shape the narrative by putting her on trial, intellectually speaking, but instead, he became the one whose seriousness was called into question. His assumptions about who holds knowledge, who deserves a seat at the table, and who should prove themselves, those assumptions crumbled the moment he realized he had no response to her preparation. In the end, Crockett didn't just beat him at his own game. She showed that the game itself was flawed, and that the real measure of intellect isn't about test scores or public dares. It's about knowing when to speak, when to wait, and how to be ready when no one expects you to be. Vance thought he was delivering the blow, but he walked into a moment he had no control over, and once he realized he wasn't the smartest person in the room, he chose silence over substance. In the aftermath of the exchange between JD Vance and Jasmine Crockett, the dust settled not with loud declarations, but with the weight of what had already occurred. The moment didn't need follow-up commentary or endless debate, it had already spoken for itself. In the span of less than a minute, A casually delivered challenge meant to diminish was transformed into a case study in quiet preparedness and intellectual control. Vance had walked into that moment, expecting a spectacle. He could manage a narrative, he could direct. But what he hadn't accounted for was the fact that Crockett didn't operate on his assumptions. She didn't respond emotionally or defensively. She responded with precision. The sealed envelope, prepared months in advance, wasn't just a clever prop, it was a demonstration of what it looks like when someone refuses to be boxed into the stereotypes others have drawn for them. The incident didn't just reflect poorly on Vance's political instincts, it reflected on the deeper, cultural habit of mistaking performance for substance. By choosing not to respond to Crockett's challenge by letting the envelope sit unopened and unanswered, Vance reinforced the perception that his original dare had been empty. Not only had he underestimated her, but he had also revealed that his own confidence was rooted in performance, not preparation. For Jasmine Crockett, the outcome wasn't just a personal vindication, it was a public reckoning. It challenged a broader narrative about who deserves to be considered intelligent in political spaces. It reminded audiences that intellect doesn't always come wrapped in Ivy League credentials or articulated through polished, traditional rhetoric. Sometimes, it arrives quietly, with receipts. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need applause. What she did, instead, was reset expectations. She proved that sometimes the most powerful response is the one that doesn't match your opponent's energy, but redirects it. She didn't fight Vance on his terms. She forced him to confront the fact that she had already done the work he wasn't willing to do. In the silence that followed, his silence told the rest of the story. In politics, moments like this aren't about who speaks the loudest or who dominates the microphone. They're about who controls the narrative, even when they say very little. Crockett controlled the moment not because she was aggressive, but because she was prepared. Vance lost control because he thought preparation wasn't necessary, that suggestion alone would carry weight. He learned, in real time, that it didn't. This wasn't just a clash between two politicians. It was a clash between assumption and evidence, between performance and principle. And in the end, the one who had done the quiet work walked away with something far more lasting than a headline. She walked away with credibility, and a reminder to anyone watching: never mistake composure for weakness and never challenge someone who's already done the homework.